Welcome back to the Thinkers and Makers podcast. This is my conversation with Kim Kuypers. Kim's a professor at the Faculty of Psychology and Neuroscience at Maastricht University in the Netherlands. She does research on psychedelics like psilocybin and LSD. She wants to find out how they can be used to treat mental illnesses like depression, but also what the effects of psychedelics on things like neuroplasticity, creativity, and empathy are. I hope you enjoy this conversation. If you do, please like the episode and subscribe to the podcast. And now, here's my conversation with Kim Kuypers. So Kim, you're a professor of psychopharmacology to be precise, and I'm a student, a grad student, but I thought we'd switch roles for a bit, and I brought a pop quiz for you. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, so what do the Beatles, A$AP Rocky, David Bowie, Aphex Twin, and Jimi Hendrix have in common?
So I think they came up with their most beautiful songs under the influence of psychedelics.
Pretty much right. So they all have songs about psychedelics or about LSD to be precise.
Yeah.
So it's something that's important for artists, but it can also be viewed from a different perspective. And your research is the scientific perspective on psychedelics.
Yeah.
So maybe let's start with LSD because that's what they've all been singing about. Maybe for those who don't know, what is LSD? How would you describe it?
It's a psychedelic drug. It's a synthetic drug that can be made of natural components. It is a drug that induces hallucinations. It has mind-altering properties. But it can also have medicinal properties.
Mm-hmm.
It was researched back in the 60s, 70s. I don't know whether it's detailed enough. Perhaps it's still too vague for people. People use it recreationally to come closer to themselves, to enhance their creativity.
So we have a couple of keywords. You said it enhances creativity. It can alter your perception. Maybe first, for starters, how does it work in the brain? What's the underlying mechanism? When I take LSD, what happens in my brain so that my perception is altered?
So this is a very complex question. We still do not know the details yet, but what we know is when you look at a neurotransmitter level, so the communication substances that your brains use to send messages, we know that LSD works as an agonist at the serotonin system. And we also know that a specific receptor, the serotonin 2A receptor, is responsible for these mind-altering properties. We also know that it works on other neurotransmitter systems, but what the exact role of these actions is, that is not totally clear. But that's the same for medication. We don't know exactly how it works.
So it's a very complex system. There's like some things that are known, but we're not completely sure yet.
Yes.
So you said it acts on serotonin and the receptors. What does that mean? Like, what is serotonin, and how does LSD affect the behavior of serotonin?
So serotonin is one of the communication substances in the brain. You can see it as a key that works, that can communicate via a lock, that is the receptor. And when you're normally functioning, serotonin will regulate your sleep pattern or your mood or your eating behavior, memory. And what LSD does is work as this key on a specific, in a specific lock. So it will mimic what the normal neurotransmitters do in our brain.
So it basically it does similar things that serotonin does in the brain.
Yeah. But then in an amplified way.
In an amplified way, so it's stronger, it has stronger effects.
Yeah, and then for LSD, and they discovered this a couple of years ago, it's more special than the other classical psychedelics. There is a lit so LSD is really trapped in the receptor, and that's why it can also act for a very long time. So it's really trapped there.
So if LSD has effects comparable to serotonin, maybe it's interesting to understand what normally causes like serotonin. Like, when is it used in the brain? Are there certain things that you do on an everyday basis that also function using serotonin?
So yeah, like I mentioned, your sleep patterns rely on serotonin, your mood relies on it, your eating patterns. So a lot relies on serotonin. Memory too.
And you said it's LSD is synthetic. So could you tell us a bit about how is it produced?
I'm not a chemist, so I cannot tell you that what the steps are to do it. But I have a book here, and we will discuss it later on. There you will find the steps how to produce LSD.
Okay, interesting. For the interested viewer, we'll provide the reference. So you mentioned LSD is a psychedelic drug.
Yeah.
Maybe what constitutes a psychedelic drug, and what are other examples of psychedelic drugs?
That's a question that which we have debates about in the field even, because some people want to call only the classical psychedelics, so the substances that work on the serotonin 2A receptor psychedelics. So examples are LSD, psilocybin, the magic mushrooms, ayahuasca, DMT. But there are also, I want to take it more broader, and I also want to include the empathogens like MDMA. It will not create these typical hallucinations. It has different effects, but it also works on a 5-HT2A receptor and serotonin 2A receptor. And then you have these other two classes that people really do not see as psychedelics. You have the dissociatives, of which ketamine is a prototypical example. And then you have this class containing other substances, of which cannabis is an example. Why do I want to mention all these drugs or substances? Because they all, except for ketamine, that is that is even a medicine, but all the others are illegal substances with medicinal properties that we are now discovering, but they are still not frowned upon, but people are a bit anxious, and they do not see it as medication.
So you mentioned the two ways to use psychedelics. There's the recreational use, which some people are familiar with, and then it can be used for therapy and for medical purposes.
Yeah.
Could you maybe tell us a bit about your background? What did you study, and from what perspective are you looking at psychedelics? And also, what got you interested in psychedelics?
Yeah. So when I had to decide at the end, when I finished high school, I had to decide what I was going to study. I had always an interest in pharmaceutical sciences, but also psychology. So it was difficult for me to pick a study, but then I just went with my gut feeling. I picked psychology. And I was really convinced that I was going to be a clinical psychologist, really trying to help people with problems. And I ended up in Maastricht studying psychology. And here we have a very research-orientated education. So in my second year, I knew that research was really the ultimate thing for me. So I started orientating on that. I did a research internship because we have to do this as part of our studies. They presented me a study in which I could study the effects of MDMA, so the psychoactive component of ecstasy, on driving performance. And I think when they told me that, I think my head exploded, because I would be able to give substances, which is linked to pharmaceutical sciences, and then give it to healthy people and then see what their driving performance is like. We do these on-the-road driving tests. So we really put people in a car next to a driving instructor and put them on the public road. So that was the plan. And when I had to start my internship, it was not available. And I had to pick another internship. So there was now a colleague of mine who started a study investigating the effects of an antihistamine on cognition, also with EEG. I thought, yeah, it's still cool enough. It's still putting substances in, bringing people into a certain state. So I did that. And when I finished my study, so when I had my psychology degree, I was offered a PhD position. And yeah, my love of research could not stop me from saying yes. And it was on this MDMA project that I intended to do as an internship. So that is where my journey started. We did a couple of MDMA studies, and then we proceeded doing also studies with LSD and psilocybin. So that's my story.
So it occurred quite naturally to you. You studied psychology, and then you just had the opportunity to do some research.
Yeah.
You enjoyed it. You thought, that's what I want to do. And then you just moved on and took the next steps.
Just indeed, naturally, and also very curiosity driven. Yeah.
So you did end up working on the MDMA and driving study. That sounds very interesting. It sounds very direct. So could you walk us through the process of how that study goes? Because I think for people who don't have a background in like experimental studies in psychology, that sounds quite wild. You just put people on drugs and then let them drive.
Yeah, but I will also put it into context. So back then, people were really afraid of MDMA because it is used in a party setting, a recreational setting. And people do drive when they are under the influence. So this was the question, what does MDMA do to driving performance? We received money from the European Commission to do this research. So how does it look like? We asked healthy participants with experience with the substance. Why do I emphasize this? Because it was in the early 2000s, and when you do a study, you have to run it via an ethics committee. They have to approve of it. And we thought, what would be the best approach? Just ask people who have never had experience with this drug and give it to them. Then you might stimulate drug use, and you might also end up with a very anxious person or somebody who has negative effects. So we decided we will look for people with experience. That's what we did. And then after they were medically screened and found to be healthy, that's also very important because, side note, we once had a participant who was already a user who then received an ECG, so they checked his heart. And then he had this short route in his heart that which means that if he would take stimulants, that it could go very badly for him. So we always screen participants when they're healthy. We include them. How does it go then? They come here to the research lab in the morning. We give them breakfast. We do drug screens just to see whether they did not take anything else or alcohol. And then we give them the substance orally. And then you wait. So for MDMA, it's around 90 minutes that it peaks. And we want to test at peak. And then after these 90 minutes, we just brought the people to the car. And then they had to drive for 1 hour on the public road. We were interested in weaving. So we assessed how much they diverted from the white line in the middle. And our conclusion was, that it is actually that people improve their driving performance when taking MDMA, but it also has to be put into context because it is a very boring task. Driving for an hour on the public road, they were only allowed to drive 100 kilometers an hour, which is now normal, but back then... so it's a stimulant drug. It will keep you awake. But this is not then to give the advice that people just should take MDMA when they go on a long holiday and have to drive long.
Interesting. That's surprising, I must say. So you said the participants all had previous experience with MDMA. Is that something that you still do? that you still look for in study participants?
Yeah, so that differs. We always had this approach. There are research labs that have a different approach. For example, in Switzerland, they also take drug-naive participants. For the microdosing studies, we do not have it anymore as a requirement. And for the studies with the full hallucinogenic doses, I think we're also, I have to think deep because we have a lot of studies. I think we're also diverting a bit from it. We recently, our colleagues finished a patient study, and there you will have people who do not have experience. And it is necessary to have this information. What does a drug do if somebody does not have the experience?
Mm-hmm. You mentioned microdosing. What is that?
So microdosing is taking a psychedelic in a very small amount, usually 1/10 of a regular dose, and then taking the drug repeatedly. It's not intended to have hallucinations or perceptual changes, but people take it to enhance creativity or mood, social behavior, productivity. They take it for a range of reasons, but also to self-medicate. And also there you see they take it for depression, anxiety, ADHD.
So I think microdosing is something that many people have just been experimenting with, especially I think it has been increasing in recent times. But it feels like most people who do it, like most of the times when you talk to people who have done it, it'll be something like, oh, my friend told me about it and told me I should check it out. So I just tried it and it feels so good. So sometimes it feels like it lacks scientific backing and it's just something people do because they think it benefits them, which you can argue is good for them if it makes them happy or if it works for them. But then at the same time, maybe you do want to know from a more scientific perspective what it does.
You're totally right. So it's a very... the psychedelic research field is in its infancy, but I really see microdosing as the baby in this field. We have a lot of anecdotal evidence. People take it, experience good effects, but some people also state it does nothing for me, or I stopped because of effects that I did not like. Now I see there are more and more studies, placebo-controlled studies being published, and the effects they find is, and we also did some studies, are very scattered. There are a lot of null effects, so not showing that there is an increase in working memory or creativity. We have shown, for example, that a single dose, so not microdosing, but one small dose increases attention for some people, also decreases pain perception. But then the real question stands, what if you take it for a repeated time or a longer time? And then some people in the field say you have to take it for at least 1 month. And the studies that have been conducted until now are giving it for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, so not a month. There is also a lot to do about it's just placebo. There was one large self-blinding study done by Imperial College that showed that it's just expectancy. If you think that you had something, that you took something, you will feel better. I will not deny, I do think that there is always, in all research, you have this expectancy effect. You will improve. But we have also shown on objective measures that a single small dose does something, induces neuroplasticity, or another study has shown that it changes connectivity. So you cannot deny that it doesn't do anything, but we still have to discover a lot.
You mentioned 2 things that I would like to pick up. The first one was you talked about the effects on creativity.
Yeah.
And I mean, we started with musicians. So I think in the context of psychedelics, creativity is something that many people have on their mind and maybe something many people hope to get from it. But then when you go from the anecdotal, this musician made a song about it, to something more scientific, how do you measure creativity?
Oh, it's so difficult. It is, we have validated creativity measures. But I do think that we're not close enough to assess true creativity. So to give you an example, there is the alternate uses task that is being used to assess creativity, and you show a pencil to your participant and you say, you can write with a pencil, but what more can you do with it? Mm-hmm. And then they can come up with alternatives for 1 or 3 minutes or even more. And then you look at how fluent were they, so how many answers did they come up with, but also how original were they if you compare their answers to those of other people. And then
so you measure originality by the fewer people came up with the idea, the more original it is.
Yes. Yeah. And then you can also take the ratio just to control for fluency. So somebody might only say one thing, but that can be highly original. So you have to control for the number of answers they gave. And this is then a true index for divergent thinking or flexible cognition. So we have shown in the past, in a naturalistic study, that ayahuasca, for example, increases divergent thinking, but it comprises convergent thinking. So coming up with the right solution is more difficult when you are under the influence of ayahuasca, which is also not that surprising, as was the finding that MDMA as a stimulant enhances certain aspects of driving performance. So, but to answer your question, it is, I think, until now, it's very difficult to study true creativity. And I would like to have more ecologically valid measures. In our last study, we introduced story writing. So we asked a person, we give them 2 words, and then they can think about it the whole day. And then at a certain moment, they have to write a story, including these 2 words. We did that in a microdosing study. We did not show a lot of effects. We showed on 2 parameters an effect of the lowest dose. So we also received criticism. It's not yet published. That it's very weird that we only find an effect of this low dose. And is it a true effect? So there is still, it is the data. Mm-hmm. So it is in the data, but we really have to discover more about, what the effects are of psychedelics on creativity. There are also some studies showing that psilocybin, even in low doses, affects creativity, divergent thinking. And then talking about it, why is this so important? You can say creativity is highly important, and we have huge problems in the world, and people, if they are more creative, why not take psychedelics and help all these climate problems?
Come up with new solutions to the problems we face.
This is one aspect, but you could also say, and that's what we focus on, creativity, divergent thinking is also something that patients with, for example, depression lack. They have very rigid thinking patterns, and if you're able to let them think more out of the box, they will probably be helped breaking through their usual thinking patterns. And that is also what a recent study has shown, that after, I think they gave a single dose or 2 doses, I cannot remember exactly, 2 depressed patients. And 1 month after they received this dose, their cognitive flexibility was still enhanced. And that went hand in hand with their symptom reduction.
So we spoke about creativity, and you said divergent thinking is a measure of creativity. And the way I pictured that in my head is maybe you have a tree, and the more it branches out, the more divergent the thinking is. Yep. And then maybe more convergent thinking is just like more of a straight line, but then maybe you get somewhere faster. Maybe before we go to other applications and other like uses, one more question about creativity. So across all, I mean, there's one aspect is you have a variety of different substances, and another is maybe the dosage, how much you take. Is there like one specific example where you say this pattern of consumption combined with that substance is shown or is like the most promising when it comes to creativity, or is it just very mixed?
I cannot give you the answer to that. I think the field is still too young. If you look into anecdotal evidence, you might be able to come up with an answer, but real scientific evidence and placebo-controlled studies, no, I would not be able to give the answer.
And are the effects you observe typically during, like, when people are under the influence, or is it also something you can show? And you already mentioned this kind of, is it also something that you can observe X amount of time after consumption?
Yeah, very good question. So psychedelics are typically known for their lasting effects. They have also shown, for example, that personality is changed, I think, up to 2 years after consuming a psychedelic. I think this is also, this is highly interesting. The duration of the effects, we test subacute effects a day after.
What is subacute?
So a day after. So acute would mean if you take the substance and you still have it in the body. Subacute is the day after you've used it. And then you have the longer term effects. So what we typically do is test either the day after or 7 days after. And that's what you also see in the field. They try to follow up patients, but it's difficult. So they have endpoints at, let's say, 3 weeks, 3 months. But you will also have an attrition rate. People will drop out of the study. So I cannot give you an answer of, and that is still a pending question. How long will these effects last?
So you just mentioned depression and depressive patients and how psychedelics might be promising to treat depression. Could you talk about, so I think 2 things I'm especially interested in. One is what psychedelics can be used to treat what kinds of depression, like what is the most promising research in that field? And then also, are there any explanations as to why psychedelics might work? Like, what about them might help it? You already got at that with the divergent thinking.
Yeah, but there are multiple answers. So first of all, with what type of depression? That is, I think, a bit driven by, can I say, the demand? So I think people really want to have a drug that works in a very hard to treat condition, because there you can show great effects. So I think that's why they focused on treatment. Yeah.
May I ask why the very hard to treat? Because other things don't work, so the need is greater, or
the need. And I also think that's a thought that pharmaceutical industry is also interested in that, because then they have something they can sell, I think. So first they focused, and there are not a lot of studies, but the studies focused on treatment-resistant depression. That means that if a person is depressed and took 2 kinds of treatments and really took it like it was intended to take and did not get symptom relief, then you call a patient treatment-resistant. So they did studies in these patients, and they showed that 1 to 2 doses, together with some support, already gave symptom relief, but not for all, and the duration was also, so again, how we discussed the follow-up, so that's more difficult to know how many people are still in remission. There are now also studies looking into regular depression, and then which substance works the best. That is also a bit driven by the availability of substances. We have some pharmaceutical companies producing psilocybin. I think psilocybin is the easiest to get. There's now also some research with LSD and anxiety disorders, or I don't know, other indications. Yeah, LSD also works in addiction. But I do think that most evidence at present is there for psilocybin. There has also been done some studies with ayahuasca, but there it's even more difficult to find a pharmaceutical company that produces ayahuasca.
What is ayahuasca?
So that's an Amazonian brew. It's made of 2 things, or two the bark and the roots of plants. It contains DMT, that is a very fast-acting psychedelic. If you would take DMT alone, they also call it a lunch high. They call it like this because you can take it, you have your high, and then you're back to normal, and then go back to work. But ayahuasca is special in that it contains DMT, but also together with a substance that makes the effects of DMT last longer. They block certain enzymes in the body that break down DMT. And it's used, also it is used in a ceremonial context. So here in the Netherlands, you also have retreats where people can go to, where they can take it. You also have, it's also taken in the context of religion. You have 2 churches who take it for their religion.
Interesting. So a lot of cultural background.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and that can also be used to treat depression.
Yeah, it has been shown that there was also symptom relief after they gave participants with depression ayahuasca. And now remember, you also asked, how does it work?
Exactly. Yeah.
So in this case, in this ayahuasca study, they also showed that ayahuasca enhanced neuroplasticity. So what is that? If we all have neurons in the brain, communicating, being connected to each other, all these highways in our brain. And
so the information highways, where the information flows through the brain. Yeah,
and what ayahuasca is able to do with all other classical psychedelics too, is give more branches, more side routes. And this is something that happens too when you learn things. Also, when you are exercising, your brain becomes more plastic. What I have shown is, and then with another substance, ketamine, I've mentioned it before, is that ketamine also induces neuroplasticity. And we know that neuroplasticity is hampered in patients with depression. They've shown for ketamine that this increase in neuroplasticity goes hand in hand with with the symptom relief. So this could be an explanation why ketamine, ayahuasca, psilocybin work in depression, but this is only on this level. Another explanation is because people are able to think more out of the box, or that people can get rid of their schemes. So you look at the world with tainted glasses, and your glasses get more tainted along your life. And psychedelics would be able to wipe away the taints, and so that you can look through other glasses, and other perspective to the world.
So neuroplasticity basically allows your brain to change the ways it works, the pathways, the way you think.
Yeah, make different connections. But what I also think is that, and this is something that has to be tested, you create a window of opportunity. Your brain is more plastic, and it could be more open to acquire new skills. And that's something I'm interested in. I hope that we can do research into that. So you could have your ayahuasca, psilocybin, LSD experience, creating this window of opportunity, and then start in the days after, where you normally do your integration, talk to people about their experience and how they're going to introduce this, include this in their life. Introduce them with coping skills or meditation, mindfulness practices. So something that they perhaps then could acquire at a faster pace because they had this experience, and then so to make the effects more durable of a psychedelic.
And also as a way to assist therapy, is that what you were getting at? And then, so there's some things that humans can learn much better when they're young. Does that have to do with neuroplasticity? Does it decrease as we get older? Is it higher in children, or is that not related?
Back in the days, years ago, they thought that an adult brain is not plastic at all, but that's not true. And like I said, you can also induce this plasticity by doing exercises. So we're not doomed as adults.
Yeah. You also mentioned meditation, and apparently meditating has similar effects or comparable effects on the brain as psychedelics. Could you maybe talk about what what the similarities are, what they have in common, and maybe if there's other things at the intersection.
Yeah, I cannot go in detail. We have written two reviews on that because we did not have the money to do the research, but we wanted to try to look into at what levels do they converge. So there are indeed, they have similar effects on brain patterns. What our intention now is if we have the money, is really to combine the two and see whether they are even synergistic. If you combine them.
So we had a couple of ways to use psychedelics, or potentially use psychedelics to improve like certain conditions. Another one that is often mentioned next to depression is anxieties. Could you talk about, is there anything promising? And again, do the ways psychedelics help with depression resemble the ways they help with anxiety?
Tough question. I think most research, and still, there is not a lot of research. Most research has looked into anxiety that is linked to end-of-life stress, and they have shown positive effects. There was recently also a study published in, I think, patients with general anxiety disorder with LSD. It also helped. Is it the same mechanism? I do think that they also have some kind of cognitive bias or these tainted glasses that where psychedelics can help. We also know that depression and anxiety are comorbid diseases, so they go hand in hand in a lot of patients.
So a person who has the one is more likely to also have the other.
Yeah, but... And then I want to even take it more broadly. You say it helps in depression, anxiety, but if we would have to make the list for what people state that psychedelics help, it's such a long list of mental disorders, physical disorders. They mentioned cluster headache, pain, ADHD, addiction. And then people say, how is this possible? Is it some kind of wonder drug? No, it isn't. We should find out what the common ground is in all these diseases, or how what part psychedelics affect that is beneficial for all these disorders.
So you're saying the effects are so widespread that there has to be something or potentially there's something underlying all of these effects. And a probably very difficult challenge, knowing how incredibly hard it is to do research on the brain, because everything's so incredibly complex and it's hard to measure things. But that's maybe a challenge. Like, what do they have in common? What is it, the underlying thing?
So we could talk about this. I have ideas about this, and I'm working on a grant proposal. So I'm not going
some speculation.
I'm not going to go in detail, but like you said, you can have a look at very different layers. You can look at the brain level, but also go in detail at neuronal level, hormonal level, immune system. These are known effects. Psychedelics affect the immune system, affect hormones, and all these systems are linked to each other. So I cannot give you the answer, but I do have ideas about it.
So maybe to abstract a bit, it's like the human body is a super complex dynamical system and like all these components influence each other, and then you bring in psychedelics and they have influences on different things, and then they in turn influence each other. So it's kind of hard to get at what it is.
It is, and it's so frustrating. So I really like the multidisciplinarity in science, and you really need it. But the more you read about it and the more you know about it, the more you're confronted that you don't know anything. And like you said, it all influences each other. But anyway, we have to start somewhere. So, and I think in the end, we will be able to bring all the pieces of the puzzle together.
So one thing that I find very fascinating about your field of research is how there's so many kind of research methods, and they vary so greatly. And then especially in psychedelics, you probably have other challenges that you don't have depending on what your research is. So what are the main? So I mean, we have the complexity, and it might feel overwhelming, if not impossible, to figure out everything because it's so complex. But I think that's something many disciplines feel to some extent. What are like specific challenges that you think are unique to your field that might be insightful for others or interesting?
That's a very difficult question. When you were talking, I was thinking about something that really has frustrated me for a long time. Is I really want to understand how it works on a biological level. And I would like to be able to block certain receptors, so these locks, to understand which receptor plays a role in which effect. And we do not have the substances to block all these receptors. If you then look at preclinical research where they test animals, they have much more options. They have these substances that are not yet approved and that are highly specific to block certain receptors. But yeah, an animal model is so limited. You cannot go and ask questions how their experience was or something. So that is something I find difficult.
So it's hard to isolate the effects of one thing if you can't.
And that is really something I would like to do. And then money is a very big issue because it's so expensive. Also, just to find the substances. That is also, I think, unique. If you just work with medication, you can buy it.
Where does one buy psychedelics for research? I mean, I imagine you don't just go out on the street and look for someone who sells them.
No, and then we use bitcoins. No. No. So, like I said in the beginning, there are pharmaceutical companies that synthesize these substances. But then, you are limited in what they produce. Mescaline is another psychedelic which could also be interesting, but I would not know whether a company makes this. So you're limited.
And then you mentioned funding. I mean, I'm also guessing that's something most scientists would say is a challenge and maybe even a bottleneck. Does it have to do, and you also mentioned that in the early 2000s when you started doing research, it was more stigmatized maybe. Does that play a role? Does that make it harder to get funding? Because maybe some decision makers might think, oh, that's not as scientific as it actually is. And has it changed recently?
Yeah, but then I think you have to be creative as a scientist. I heard this from American colleagues too, where NIDA back in the days was very focused on addiction. And then you can frame it in another way. You can, if you really want to learn about the positive effects of psychedelics, you can also state, I want to test the negative effects and the potentially addictive properties, but then still include tests where you can say something about the positive effects. It's just then about the framing. You can use it as research tools to bring people in a certain state and then to examine a certain construct.
So sometimes you have to get creative
to
get the funding you need. We've been talking a lot about the positive effects of psychedelics and where they hold promise to do good. So that's the therapeutical medical side of things. I'm guessing if you just look at the amount that is consumed, where the psychedelics that are produced go, I'm guessing much of it is towards recreational use. And probably some people derive some value from it, or else they wouldn't be doing it, they wouldn't be using it. But there are also some risks associated with psychedelics. So to get a well-rounded picture, we should also talk about that.
Yeah.
So maybe starting with LSD, what are the risks? What can go wrong? Why might it be dangerous? And what measures can be taken to reduce the risk?
Yeah, I would not specifically focus on LSD, but then take classical psychedelics as one category. I think that it is allowed. The first questions people always ask, is it addictive? It's a very valid and important question. For the classical psychedelics, I can say that they're very safe in that sense. They induce an immediate tolerance if you take them on a biological level. So if you would take them 2 days in a row, you will not experience these same effects. And you can also say that they are safe because who wants to have this experience days in a row? It's such a mind-blowing experience that you need some time to get a grasp on this. On a physical level,
maybe first to stay with the aspect of addiction.
Yeah.
The second thing you mentioned makes perfect sense to me. Like, it's psychologically exhausting, so maybe you need a break. Then you said you build a tolerance.
Biological tolerance, but that I don't know how long it lasts. But
doesn't that increase the risk of addiction? I would, because maybe that could also mean you build tolerance, so you just drink more. With alcohol, for example, and that it could go both ways, I'm guessing.
I think you will have a higher risk of addiction if you feel the effects immediately. And that also depends on the route, how you take it. If we look at heroin, when you inject it, it's in your blood, it's immediately in your system. You have this immediate hit, and your body knows, wow, we should do this again. For psychedelics, that it builds up more slowly. And like I said, you will not be able to have this experience as often as when you take it repeatedly.
Because it weakens, it just gets less.
Yeah, you have this tolerance, so you have to wait. I don't know how long this tolerance lasts. So I do not see that there is a highly addictive potential. At a psychological level, I could see that people think, this substance helped me, and I have to take it again to deepen the thoughts that I got or my insights. Like I always say, people can become addicted to everything. Food, gaming, shopping, whatever. So I do not exclude that, but the risk is lower than with a legal substance like alcohol or nicotine. If we look at a physical level, we know that psilocybin, but also LSD, elevates the blood pressure. But when we give it in the lab, it stays within normal ranges, so it's not threatening. So if people take it, thinking it through, it will not be detrimental on a physical level. What I do see, and then sometimes they say, but if you take LSD, aren't you going to jump out of the window? Because they have this idea. And then the idea of bad trips. That is something that I think when people take it at home, that they have to take into account that these substances can create anxiety.
What is a bad trip, maybe, for those who...
They call it, a challenging experience when you become so anxious. But this is something that you could also see, not one-on-one, but as part of a therapeutic mechanism. You can enter a room in your memory where you are confronted with your anxieties or your fears. And that is something you have to know up front, that this can happen. And when you are not supported, or when there's nobody present to comfort you or to calm you down, this can lead to a very bad experience for you.
So your fears and anxieties overwhelm you.
Yeah, indeed. And I do not per se see this as something negative, that anxieties come to the surface, because that is sometimes what you want to push away, and sometimes what you have to face to evolve. So if you take this in a controlled setting where you have people who know how to deal with this, it is not a bad trip. So that's it, I think, for classical psychedelics, the negative effects. If you then think about MDMA. So
maybe quick follow up on the bad trip. So you're saying it can be a very unpleasant experience.
Yeah.
Like you perceive fears and anxieties, but you're saying that's not necessarily a bad thing because you're confronted with them. So
Yeah.
the potentially your bad experience might help you deal with these underlying, I don't know, mechanisms, or with your underlying
how
psychology.
I see it. Yeah.
But that's your personal view, and
and
then maybe for others, it's something they want to be more careful with,
Yeah,
and something
yeah.
they're more. So it depends on your personal like risk assessment and how you value your.
And I do think that preparation is crucial. We have not discussed that yet. You should really, and then we're talking about taking it yourself. You should really inform yourself. If you enter a study, you will be prepared, and you will discuss what can happen to you and how it's going to be like, and who is going to support you. So you should be, and we also did not discuss that, be in the right mindset. That there are two things that are always said in one breath. When you say psychedelics, it's set and setting. You have to be in the right set. It should not be rushed. It should not be that, I have to do this and then take a psychedelic. No, it doesn't work like that. Create a nice set, a nice setting, a comfortable area where you can do it, where you will not be distracted. So yeah.
So be well informed. Create for yourself an environment where you feel safe and supported. You also mentioned MDMA, and earlier, and also in one of your studies, you look at how MDMA can improve empathy. Could you talk about how you investigated that, how you measured empathy, and what that means for potential use of LSD, of MDMA?
So that study was conducted during a phase in which we made a shift. We always studied the negative consequences of these substances. Also part of the zeitgeist then. People were worried about the effects of MDMA or ecstasy on cognitive performances, but we passed that stage. So we showed that a single dose of MDMA will not harm your memory forever. And then we thought, well, why not focus on the effects? So people do not take this. People take this to really experience a positive mood, to feel close to others, to experience this empathy. So we were interested to objectively measure it, to show people stated it enhances my empathy, but does it do that?
So it's anecdotal evidence.
Yes,
you were looking for scientific backing.
Yeah, like you say, LSD enhances your creativity. Does it? Yeah, so there is scientific evidence that has shown that it does. So we were interested in that. But it was also very hard to find good measures. Again, same with creativity. For empathy, it was difficult to find measures to assess empathy. So I had a look into the autism spectrum disorder field, what tests they use. So I took some tests from their field. An example is, and then people will perhaps laugh, an example is that you show expressions, or you show faces of people depicting a specific emotion. Can be happiness, anger, anxiety. And then you ask the person, which emotion do you see? And then they get 4 options. This is what we call emotion recognition or cognitive empathy. Can people put themselves in the shoes of another and see what they try to convey as an emotion? And then another aspect of that task is we ask them, do you feel with the person you see, and how aroused does this make you feel? So it's an explicit and an implicit measure of emotional empathy, we call it. And we showed that MDMA enhances your emotional empathy. Why is this so important? I think, and then I'm thinking about the applications now of MDMA. It is researched in the context of post-traumatic stress disorder. These patients have sometimes difficulties of opening up. So that is something MDMA ticks the box. It can open you up. But also people have difficulty of bonding. They sometimes feel rejected by the other persons, they feel that they cannot open up about their traumas. So in that sense, if you have more empathy and can create a better bond with your therapist, it would help your therapy.
To assist therapy once again.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So should we all take MDMA every now and then to be more empathetic with each other?
I cannot recommend that. But it reminds me of something else I also wanted to tell you. We started this MDMA research. So I told you I'm very interested in understanding the biology. Mm-hmm. And back then I thought MDMA will never be approved as a medicine.
Mm-hmm. What was back in the day?
Yeah, it's 2009, I think, that we did that study. So yeah, I was thinking that. So I really wanted to know, how does MDMA exert these or causes these effects? Mm-hmm. We know that MDMA increases levels of oxytocin, the cuddling hormone, the bonding hormone. Mm-hmm. So what you release as a mother when giving birth or breastfeeding your child. And I thought, well, let's test MDMA versus the nasal spray oxytocin. It's available as medication. And we were not able to show that, or oxytocin did not produce the same effects as MDMA. Mm-hmm. It was not powerful enough, I think. But it was really with the thought, can we come up with another substance, not MDMA, not with the stigma, and that we then can offer to these patients. Mm-hmm. But now when I look back, I'm like, yeah, MDMA will be a medicine within the coming 5 to 10 years. So we don't have to worry about that anymore. Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting. So again, what MDMA does goes beyond. So like there's the pathway through which it works, which is where there's research on. But then if you test that pathway, if you try to isolate it, you see that there has to be more to it.
Yeah.
Because you can't reproduce the effects of MDMA just through that channel.
Yeah.
So we have increased empathy. What else does MDMA do to the body and to the psyche?
Yeah, it does a lot. But what I really find interesting in my findings, so we also did a task with sounds, positive sounds, negative sounds, and then we also asked the questions, does it arouse you hearing this sound? And when people...
So it's a positive sound, like music
or children laughing or something.
And the negative
really
is
happy.
like an alarm. Or
yes, or helicopters flying over or bombs that you hear. And at least for me, the interesting part was that people were not that aroused when hearing these negative sounds, which I can easily link to PTSD and also the what you see when people get treatment with MDMA-assisted psychotherapy is that they can talk about their deepest traumas without too much, without being too much affected on an emotional level. So they can access their memories, which is hard, and they can put it in another context or write it back without these negative effects. It's not that you should forget about your memories, but it is crucial that you are not aroused or not affected that much if you think about it.
So maybe it allows you to take back some level of control from the negative experiences you've had, or like to isolate the memory from the emotions that it causes within you.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
What are the side effects of MDMA? So we've had the positive, how it can be useful and good. What are the downsides and risks of MDMA?
Again, and there it's always the question, is it addictive? Can it kill you? And also here I really have to stress, and we did not do that, I think, enough. You have recreational use where people can take, I don't know how many tablets or pills, also in combination with other drugs or substances. This can be risky use. What we do in the lab, in a clinical setting, is give it once, twice, 3 times. We know the dose, and it's very controlled. Will it create dependence if you give it in such a controlled setting? I would say no. People also know why they're there. It's to try to solve their problems, work on their problems. And they know that it helps because it's in this context with a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Can you become addicted in real life? Yes, I do think that you can become addicted. We also have there are people in healthcare that are there for their ecstasy or MDMA addiction. It is a stimulating substance. If you take it very often, if you take it days in a row, it will have more these amphetamine-like effects. So yes, there is the risk. What does it do? Also, it increases your heart rate, blood pressure. Can it be neurotoxic? So can it be damaging?
Neurotoxic?
So that it really damages your neurons.
Like long-term damage.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it has been. So they have done animal research. They have shown that it really can damage your neurons. But in those studies, they have used high doses and then also gave it twice a day, a week long. What they also showed is even after such a pattern of use that normally nobody does, there is regrowth of your neurons after years. Not in the same way, but there is regrowth. But I do want to say, so there is uncontrolled use or controlled use. You give it a couple of times. We have shown that it does not damage your memory. But you also have to be aware that stress is damaging to your memory. Mm-hmm. It is also, stress is also neurotoxic. So if you have somebody who is highly stressed because of post-traumatic stress disorder and you're going to give a substance then a few times, then you have to weigh the costs and the benefits. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in the medical setting, in the therapy setting of therapy. So you mentioned how when you started getting into research on psychedelics, things were different and more stigmatized, and that's changing. It seems to be very dynamic, and maybe the field seems to be just getting started in some ways. What advice would you give to someone who's watching this and who thinks, oh, this is interesting, this is promising, I wanna dedicate my time to studying this and then maybe also doing research. So maybe as a first step, what's a good background to have is it like medicine or psychology? And then once you have the qualification, what are the interesting and promising research directions in the future? What's your guess?
Large question.
Yeah.
What I would say is which direction or which study should you do? It doesn't matter. Just follow your gut. Do what you like to do. I see that there is an interest even from the artificial intelligence field, which you would perhaps... I would not have linked it years ago to psychedelics, but there is an interest, and I also see why. It doesn't matter. Like I already said, it's a very multidisciplinary field. We need immunologists, we need historians who can tell us what people used over the years. We also need people who are into shamanism or alternative ways of healing. We need it. So, like I said, it doesn't matter. It's good that you have an interest.
So maybe if you look around, the people who do research in your field, who you think do great work, who you admire, what's their typical background?
I don't know all the backgrounds of people, but normally I hear that they are psychiatrists or medical doctors. But that is also the circle I'm in. I'm also aware there is a lot of knowledge with the people who use these substances for healing purposes, and that are sometimes overlooked fields. So also anthropology, and like I said, historians, we need all people. Everything. And then it's really this cross-fertilization that you need, because we discussed that the human body is so complex, and with one discipline we will not get there. And it is not, I really do not want to put people in one direction. They should follow their gut, they should explore what they're good at, and then make other people enthusiastic. And together we will have, the sum of the parts will be greater. Yeah. Huh?
So to some part, it's just contributing to the great puzzle of the human mind and body. And there's so many things that play into it that it's hard to say what discipline is the most promising.
Everybody is needed.
And then are there, and you also mentioned this, research questions in your field that you think this is where we should go, this is where I believe great.
Oh, this is so difficult. Yeah, you can come up with tons of research questions. For me, it would really know about the biological thing, how it works on a biological level. Big question is also, does the psychedelic experience play the biggest role, or is it just biology? There are some people who make hallucinogen analogs, so the substance is the same chemically, but it does not produce these hallucinogenic effects. That's also a valid question, because you will be confronted with some people who are not up to the experience, perhaps demented people, not being able to give consent, or children, or I don't know who. So it is important to know what plays a role in the therapeutic effects. And then I don't know which questions. People can be very creative themselves.
So they can come up with the questions themselves. That's maybe the best way to find out.
And that would be interesting to just know from people, what questions do you have related to psychedelics? That might be the most beautiful questions.
So when we're talking about people getting into the field and getting into research, one very important aspect is also failure. I think if you want to have a career in research, but also in most other fields, you're going to be confronted with failure again and again. Have you had any experiences where you felt where you weren't content with the outcome of something, and how did you deal with that? And do you have any advice for how to deal with that?
I think that every researcher has that. When you're designing a study, you always try to come up with the most ideal scenario, and then when you have conducted a study, it usually takes a year, 2 years. Then you think, oh, why did I do that then? Or why didn't I take blood repeatedly? Or why did I do that only that? So you will always be dissatisfied, I think, with your methods. It's a learning experience. And talking about failures, I think it's perhaps stupid. So as a scientist, I think you become a better scientist just because of your failures. I had a lot of failures writing grant proposals. I do like creative process of thinking out of the box and what can we investigate. But then with all these failures, you really try to come up with a better proposal or a more inventive. So yeah.
So failing as part of a learning process, and don't view it as failures, view it as part of the learning mechanism. That's probably true and very wise. I think in the moment it's often hard to view it that way.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I was also thinking about what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but sometimes it can really kill you.
In the moment.
Yeah. And academia is very hard to stay in. So sometimes when you do not get a grant, it means that you will have to go because there is no money for you. So it can be easy to say, but I do like that people try to have this mindset. Try to crawl up.
Yeah, that's great. So failure is a learning process. Speaking of learning, I always like to ask my guests for 3 book recommendations, 3 specific book recommendations. So the first challenge as a book to give a book recommendation is, what's something from your field of research broadly that you would recommend people should read to learn more?
So yeah, indeed, that is something you asked me, and I thought I'm going to prepare. So I have 2 books, and you asked for 3. I thought, oh shoot. So the first one I'm going to show, this is one I received from my supervisor when I graduated from psychology. It's called PICKLE. It's phenethylamines I have known and loved. It's written by Alexander and Anne Shulgin, 2 psychonauts. He was a chemist. And in this book, they describe a lot of substances, how you can make them, what experiences it will give you when you will get these experiences, so the peaks. They have also written a second book. It is called Thickle, so instead of the P, it's a T. Tryptamines I've known and loved. You can see it as cookbooks. You can see it as, I told somebody, you can see it as books that will give you an insight of the medicine of the future. MDMA is in it, but there are a lot of compounds that are still not being investigated that are in here.
So it's kind of like these substances exist, and this is what they could potentially do.
Yeah, so they tried them out. It's not a book that you read from start till end. It's just a book that you can go through. And
yeah, it's very, very heavy, very big book.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So that's something from the field. But there are appearing a lot of nice books that give an introduction into psychedelics. So it's difficult to choose.
So this gives you like a wide overview of all the things out there.
Yeah.
Cool. I love that. I think that's a great recommendation. So another thing would be, do you have a recommendation for a book that is about science, but not necessarily your field?
And this is then perhaps people will laugh when I show you this. It is about Candida. It's a yeast infection. Why do I show you this? I'm also very into nutrition. I'm also following some courses. And
as a hobby.
Yes, yeah.
For personal insight.
No. It's I really want to merge the fields of nutrition and psychedelics, but I also want to have a more holistic approach to mental well-being. It is not that I see only relief in psychedelics, but it's about socializing, nutrition, exercise. So this is something I picked because I'm currently reading about it. It's it shows you. It's actually, it also includes case studies, and that is, when you read it, it is devastating. People who suffer from some symptoms and then go through traditional medicine and are even undergoes surgical operations when in the end it could have been solved with something very simplistic. This is this yeast infection. You can get that through sugar because your bacteria will feast on sugar, and then you can have a disbalance in your gut. It is so interesting to discover, for me, to discover more about the functioning of your body, but also I'm also interested in this because there is more interest in the gut-brain axis, how your gut influences your brain. It's highly relevant for psychedelics. I think 95% of your serotonin is in your gut. So we will move into this field, I'm sure. So yeah, that's this. But it could have been another book. I've also read about how important water is for your body, and that the best or the first thing you should fix in your life is drink enough. Because dehydration means your body is stressed, and when your body is stressed, you will experience symptoms.
It's also an easy fix, probably.
It is an easy fix, yeah, but sometimes it is so easy and people do not think about it.
Overlook it. Yeah, it's too simple. And is that book specifically about yeast infections, or is it more general about how a good diet, like a healthy eating habits, can improve your well-being overall?
So I have started the book, so I cannot explain to people what is. So they also have a diet, and also how this candida is involved in your, or how it interacts with your immune system. So it is broader. And then you also asked for a third book, and I forgot about that, and I also.
It's a non-scientific book. It's the third assignment.
So that is more difficult. I haven't read a non-scientific book in ages. I do have a stack of books that I still have to read, but I also think that it is caused by, I've written a book myself, a popular book about psychedelics and mental health, and I've done this. I think it occupied me for 2 years in my weekends. So that is a book that I read a lot because I had to fine-tune it. So I do hope that in the future I have more time to read. But then I read these silly things about social awkwardness, and there are a lot of funny books out there.
And maybe if I can try to get something out of you, is there a book that you read maybe early when you still went to university or something that you feel influenced your thinking or was kind of important to you?
God, that is a difficult one. I cannot pinpoint one. I've read, and I'm not going to name them. I've read silly books, which were actually eye openers. I'm not going to name the books, but also there I go by my gut feeling and select things that keep me occupied at that moment.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, it's not like the books you recommended weren't enough to read. I think especially Pikal will keep everyone occupied for a while.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kim. That was a wonderful conversation, very insightful. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for doing the research you do to help us all better understand psychedelics and how they can be used for, well, a wide variety of different scenarios that we just covered. So thank you so much
for this conversation.
Thank you for listening to the Thinkers and Makers podcast. If you want to support the project, you can check out the books that Kim recommends using the links in the description. Please also feel free to like the video and share it with your friends and subscribe to the podcast. I look forward to seeing you next time.